Hi, everybody. It's Angelo Caruso, and I'm on today with Kristen Hurrell. She is a licensed psychologist in southeastern Michigan. How are you, Kristen?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Doing great, thanks. We're going to talk a little bit about the human condition today. You up for that?
Yes.
This is your area of expertise. Tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you go to school?
So I did my undergraduate degree at Michigan State University.
Yeah.
After that, I have a master's in forensic psychology from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. And then I have my PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Detroit Mercy.
Excellent. So I think most people probably understand every word you said just now, except perhaps the word forensic, which I had the great pleasure of looking up the other day because I had forgotten what it meant. And as I recall, forensic has kind of an underbelly tone to it. It has to do with crime and the criminal element. Is that true?
Yes. Yeah. So it's in terms of forensic psychology, it's how human behavior influences, things like, crimes, victimizations, that sort of thing. My research was much more on kind of the victimization aspect of it.
Okay. So when we talk about forensic psychology, we're talking about CSI, we're talking about expert witness type work, that sort of thing?
Yes. Yeah, and psychological assessment. Mm-hmm.
Psychological assessment of criminals if we were going to chase it all the way down the line, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. And I've heard the term forensic accounting a lot, and I always thought it was just people that did a certain type of accounting, but it's based in criminal activity, white-collar crime, for example. We're going into the numbers to find out where somebody went wrong. And whenever we do this, it's an interesting exercise because most people know the difference between right and wrong, but we make decisions, sometimes subconsciously, but more often consciously. We think we're smarter than the average bear, or that maybe we can get around something, or maybe we can game the system somehow. What is it about human beings, Kristen, that we think we can beat the system, that we're smarter than everybody else?
Well, human beings are just so incredibly complex, and different things from our past influence the way that we behave, the way that we think, the way that we problem solve. And I think a lot of people, like you mentioned before, kind of either consciously or unconsciously behave in ways of which they have been known to adapt and what they have been taught, often from a very young age. Yeah. And it's kind of all they know. So I think that that's kind of what influences a lot of human behavior. And kind of when people present for therapy, it's because that the way that they're kind of going through life is giving them some sort of trouble, and they're able to have a little bit more awareness that they want to make some kind of improvements or changes in that.
You got me going on this whole criminal thing that people, for example, good people who would normally say that they're honest and upstanding citizens, steal from their employer in small ways that they somehow calculate in their own mind are not important ways, and therefore it's not actually stealing. This blurry line between with regard to morality. How is it that we cut ourselves a doctor's note, for stuff like stealing office supplies from work? Lots of research suggests that people that get busted for shoplifting actually have the money to pay for what they're stealing in their pocket. What's going on here?
Well, I feel like a lot of kind of rationalization kind of goes through that. They're thinking of, my boss made me do X, Y, and Z. I'm not being paid enough, so I kind of deserve this. People rationalize, through that way in terms of kind of stealing from the workplace. Like, I'm working here, I'm spending a lot of my time and energy away from my family. This is no big deal. So they kind of rationalize it that way. In terms of shoplifting, I think from what I've kind of read and kind of deduced is it's much more of kind of like a thrill seek It's the, can I get away with it? They get that kind of like adrenaline going, and it feels like when they're able to steal something that they're kind of getting away with something, and they get that kind of feeling of high, those endorphins kind of really rushing towards them.
And these are individual decisions. Shoplifting is not something, although some people, make it a team sport. There's a confederate that's drawing attention away from, we've seen all this happen a lot. But a lot of these things that we're talking about, stealing office supplies from work and stuff, it's an individual decision. The person's acting alone. But we've seen another thing happen in today's society, which is a version of groupthink, where I'm thinking of people who are making protests and that sort of thing, where and I mention this to you because it's an intellectual process, right? I'm going to leave the safety and comfort of my own home, where I probably should be tonight, watching television or doing homework or looking after my family, and I'm going to go out into the cold, wet street after I have a couple drinks and be with a bunch of people who are angry. So we're seeing a little bit of this. It's toned down this year, but we saw a lot of it last year. You do some work with how groups affect individuals?
I mean, not necessarily in terms of as what maybe a social psychologist would, but I understand kind of the impact of how people can be influenced among a group.
Yeah.
It feels much safer to participate in some sort of kind of global cause if you have kind of the support of a larger network of groups. So we can kind of think in terms of kind of protests and being very passionate about something, wanting to kind of rally for that force. We wouldn't necessarily do so kind of individually, but we feel safer amongst a larger group of being able to do that.
Yeah, and it's not just physical. It's not just a physical proximity that makes us feel safer. I'm going to guess, I've been in therapy twice in my life, so I'm not an expert in it by any stretch, but I would imagine that that you hear from people in your sessions, which of course are confidential, that people are often referencing third parties like my friend or my family member, my husband, my wife. To the point where you actually wonder who you're actually talking to. You're asking someone how they feel or how they think, but they constantly reference a third party. Do you see that a lot in our society?
I think that we are very observant creatures, and a lot of what we do is kind of an awareness of what we see from around us that can kind of influence how we think and act and behave.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely see that.
Yeah. We also are seeing some things happening in the mental health industry, and I'm not talking about extreme cases, just shifts in how we think about each other and how we treat each other. An easy example of this is the Me Too campaign, which has women thinking about not only thinking about themselves differently, but perhaps thinking about all of the male gender differently, in terms of how much more how we'll handle future behavior, how we handle certain types of dialogue. I think most people have been monitoring this. Do you think that we'll see some changes in how the genders treat each other and how we interact?
I definitely think so. I think it's kind of been around and kind of more or less kind of whispered about, but I think with the Me Too movement really kind of made it kind of explode and really come kind of front and center, kind of is very much in your face in terms of society. It allowed women to be able to feel safer in speaking up and talking about their stories. And not just women either, men who have been sexually harassed as well. But I definitely, as it is brought to kind of this very societal cultural level, it's created more of a safe space to be able to talk about, to be able to acknowledge its existence, and then also allow us all as a society to say, this is kind of unacceptable. And I think once, topics get brought to such a large mainstream in terms of media setting, it creates more of that awareness and for more people to kind of talk about it. And then, what are we going to do about? So I definitely think, and I'm certainly hoping that it leads to kind of, changes in the way that, we treat ourselves and how we allow others to treat ourselves as well.
There's an interesting thing going on, that this kind of, I don't know, this idea that men and women can one of the things that gets us in trouble is the fact that we're different. Why can't we all be more the same, and then we won't have so many differences? And I wonder sometimes, how much can you expect from a gender? How much movement can there be toward the center before we lose our own identities, where men stop being men, women stop being women, we're all just robots? I heard somebody joke the other day, that men for some time now have just wandered the earth, urinating on their own pants 6 or 7 times a day, because that's just who we are. I mean, a woman would never do that, but men do it and don't think anything of it. How much can we expect men to change? Certainly, we need a more reasonable standard of etiquette, and then the other direction. Is part of our society a bit too sensitive? Do we need to be calibrated a little bit more carefully so that we can coexist?
I don't think it's necessarily kind of like changing genders. What I kind of see it as creating kind of like a safer, more respectful environment for everybody.
Yeah.
How are we going to speak to other people? How are we going to allow others to speak to us? And not kind of allowing things to become so passive, which is how I feel like women have been taught to deal with harassment, and sometimes men with harassment. If they're sexually harassed as well, it's just to kind of just blow it off.
Yeah.
Now I feel like it's very much of, maybe taking a stand. Maybe it's, excuse me, like I heard you say that, and that's very inappropriate. It's not necessarily fighting back, but it's just kind of creating a little bit more of a boundary of what we're going to be able to withstand just as a society in general.
Yeah, very good. You used the word safe a minute ago. I know that there's been some gender shifting or gender flexibility lately, where people, there's people changing genders. There's a kind of I saw a term the other day, gender free. I don't know what the actual term was, where they don't identify with being, this person doesn't identify with being female or male, even to the extent of going back in time to revise the original birth certificate. So here's the question. Again, we want people to feel comfortable and safe. What's to happen with when are things not normal? If everything is okay, where do we draw the line? Should lines be drawn for this kind of a thing? What do you think?
I mean, in terms of kind of the gender identity and agender is what's kind of the kind of clinical term for someone who identifies not kind of as any gender. And in terms of kind of structure, I would say if it's inhibiting one's ability to kind of navigate life successfully, then it's given people a problem. Whether that involves kind of like a societal change, I'm not really quite sure. Because I like to kind of look at people in more of like an individualist way, but it definitely has created a lot of media attention, and it's something that I am very much interested in kind of looking at, because I feel that it's very controversial. Yeah.
And you mentioned, does it affect other areas of your life? A while back I was researching addiction a little bit, because I wanted to get a more clear definition of what addiction really entails. And it's a hard definition to come by. I saw one rather sophisticated, elaborate, trusted website listed like 10 or 12 things. It was a checklist. And if you have like 7 of them, then you're addicted. What is the formula for this? How do you figure this out? But one of the things that came up on the list in almost every source that I looked in was, is it negatively impacting other areas of your life?
Yep.
And I suppose that's when people start thinking, maybe I need to talk to somebody like you or maybe I need to, get into a counseling or therapy or something so that I can get some help because now we've crossed that line I referenced a minute ago. We have gone from feeling good about ourselves and safe and productive in life to a place that maybe doesn't feel quite as good. And so now it's time to take action and maybe see somebody and get it fixed.
Mm-hmm.
A very small percentage of the U.S. population is in therapy, correct?
Yes.
What percentage do we know? 2%? 5%?
No, I am not sure. I would say less than 5%.
I would too.
Yeah.
And then, so it begs the question, what percentage of the U.S. population should be in therapy?
Oh gosh, you know what? And I always say it in a very kind of like happy manner that I think every single person could kind of benefit from therapy.
Oh, for
I
sure.
think that there's kind of a like therapy gets a bad rap.
Oh, for sure.
And just kind of like psychology, mental health in general, I feel like has kind of a negative connotation. It's shifting, thankfully, now,
Yeah.
but I feel like I like to explain therapy to people as having a supportive environment where you can kind of create a greater, deeper sense of self-awareness, that it doesn't necessarily have to be in the midst of you kind of being in a crisis situation for you to come to. Oftentimes that's kind of, I mean, we want to get you to therapy and kind of working towards things before we get to that point. So we can kind of create like a little bit of knowledge about, your warning signs, some of your healthier coping skills, maybe help you identify coping skills that could be helpful. But I just think that therapy is just a great tool to helping you live a more fulfilling life.
Absolutely true. It's interesting to me that we have so many specialists that we go to. We'll go to an orthodontist to straighten our teeth. We'll go to a cardiologist for heart trouble.
Mm-hmm.
We'll go to a nephrologist if we have issues with our kidneys.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't mind sharing any of this, probably not in open, free-form conversation with strangers. But we don't mind telling people I got to go to the doctor and I'm having something looked at. But we are very, very shy and protective of what's going on up here. If we were going to go see a psychiatrist or a psychologist, that would be like a deepest, darkest secret. And we would never tell anybody about that except anybody that had to know. And you're right, it's like a stigma, man.
Yeah.
And I don't know how it got to be that way. I have a theory that we spend more energy on our dead cells, like our skin and our hair and our fingernails, than we do on our important live cells, which are our organs, like our brain. Now, it's come a long way because we used to put people that had, quote, issues into special buildings called, what were they called, asylums and sanitariums and places like that. We don't even have any of those in Michigan anymore because there's help for those people, right?
Well, we do still have inpatient psychiatric hospitals. They're just so incredibly overcrowded.
Oh, okay.
and they're certainly not of what we see in the media as kind of like mental health asylums. But yeah, it does. Mental health is very much stigmatized. Mental illness is very stigmatized. How I try to kind of work with that in therapy, in terms of, I kind of talk about it like how you would, if you had, a heart problem, you'd have no trouble going to a cardiologist. You're going through some things right now. Just think of it kind of that way. It's kind of no different of a treatment.
I think part of it is that we're not big, our society right now, we don't value introspection. We don't value knowing ourselves extremely well. We put a higher value on other things. I was talking with a good friend of mine the other day who has a health problem. And I was just asking him basic questions about his condition. And I was shocked that not only didn't he know the answers after having the condition for months, he didn't want to know the answers. I was more curious about his body than he was.
Yeah.
And if he feels that way about, stuff below the neck, imagine how protected and tightly held above the neck issues are like. Well, what are we seeing now? Insecurity, bipolar. What's trending right now? What seems to be a big issue for people?
In terms of therapy?
Yeah, or conditions. I know some of them are rare, like uh, personality disorders and things like that. But insecurity, which I don't know is a clinical diagnosis,
No.
but the stuff that the underlying things of not being yourself and not being okay upstairs, they have like, it's like a stair step thing, right? It starts with not having other parts of your life in order. Isn't that true?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And in terms of kind of if we're talking about kind of themes and underlying themes of what people kind of are reluctant to talk about and be about, is I would say vulnerability.
Vulnerability. Let's talk about that. What do you
Uh,
mean?
to take that introspection, to really kind of dive deep into reasons why you feel a certain way, reasons why you behave a certain way, what would happen if you were to change it, is that kind of piece, and what we try to shy away from, like individually and kind of on a larger scale, is vulnerability. We don't want to feel helpless, and talking about deeply personal things about
Yeah,
ourselves make us
yeah.
feel incredibly vulnerable.
Are you suggesting that vulnerability is like I don't know, the root cause of some of these issues that we have? It leads to other things?
No, not necessarily. No.
Because I ask because it's an interesting theory. I mean, just go back to the Me Too campaign that we talked about, or the Me Too situation that we talked about a minute ago. There are lots of theories that because women feel vulnerable, they're finding themselves in positions they might not otherwise be in. Because they feel vulnerable, they don't speak out when something happens. Because they're perceived as vulnerable by men, men take liberties. I mean, I think there's something to this vulnerability issue.
Yeah, women kind of, we are vulnerable. We are the more vulnerable gender. And to the Me Too movement, I think kind of creates a little bit more kind of power and like a safer space for us to kind of take a little bit of that vulnerability and turn it into strength, kind
Yes.
of empower us a little bit.
Yeah. And, by the way, women don't have the market cornered on vulnerability. Men have vulnerability too, but we have other issues, right? We won't talk about it. We won't.
Right.
Men may probably, it's difficult to say who has the bigger issue, but men struggle with vulnerability in a completely different way, in my opinion.
Right.
Like men fake a lot of things going through life. Like we fake bravado and we fake like we know how to do something, and we fake it long enough to figure it out in some cases not, But it's just fascinating how any of us ever get through life because of all the potholes and all of the things in our way. Recently, opioids have become a huge problem. Opioids are a challenge for a lot of reasons. One is that they're above board, at least with certain illnesses. You would expect to take painkillers to nurse yourself back from an illness, but the addictive properties of them, and then
Right.
the mood changes of opioids. Isn't that one of the big symptoms of opioid addiction? Is that your mood is unstable?
It can kind of create more of like a sedative like effect of like a high, and that's kind of why it's addicting, because
Okay.
people like the way that it makes them feel.
Right. So if you've been taking, and I know a number of people like this, you probably do too, who have experienced long-term opioid use. I don't even have to say addiction. Let's just say long-term opioid use.
Right.
But they're probably not feeling themselves anymore. They've got, for lack of a better term, a new normal. And now they
Right.
operate day to day from that place, right?
Yeah, your body becomes physiologically dependent on that medication.
Yeah.
And what we have now is this this emphasis for prescribing physicians to start drastically cutting down people's prescriptions because of the epidemic. So what you have are people that have been on a certain high dose that they're physiologically dependent on. Their prescribing physician, drastically cuts it in half or, not at all. And you're going through withdrawals, and withdrawal from opiates is not fun. And that's why we have, these people that are going out on the streets getting synthetic opiates. And that stuff is laced with all kinds of dangerous things. But your body, the withdrawal effect is so profound that that's what makes people, seek for that. And it's really unfortunate. I saw it a lot at the Detroit VA when I was working with veterans, and it was heartbreaking.
Yeah, I bet. And, he's been gone a while now, but Prince, I think, had an opiate issue, and he actually died from something called fentanyl. Do I have that right?
Mm-hmm. So it's 100 times more potent than morphine.
Wow.
Yeah. And
he didn't even know he was taking it, so he's just dosing his regular dose, and then they find him in the elevator, right?
Yeah. I'm not sure exactly what the story was. I mean, sometimes fentanyl patches will be prescribed after surgery, but you're not on that for long. And sometimes the opiates or heroin that's being sold on the streets is cut with fentanyl. And what you think you're getting is kind of pure heroin, but it's cut with fentanyl, and you kind of dose it how you would normally do for like a regular opiate use. And then, because it's so incredibly potent, you overdose. So.
All right. So let's review. We've got a bunch of human beings on the planet walking around extremely vulnerable, making bad decisions, harming themselves with their own decisions. We've got TV commercials telling you what product you should ask your doctor to prescribe. We've got the AMA deciding to not honor those prescriptions because people don't know what's best for them, it turns out. We should probably leave that to the experts. We've got people trying to figure each other out, but lacking the tools or the patience to do so. Where are we going? I mean, this seems almost like a recipe for self-sabotage. Do you have faith in human nature? Are we going to figure this out? Oh, and I forgot to mention, we have a stigma that prevents us from actually going to get help on the very things we need help on. Yeah. I'm getting depressed. I might have to come see you.
Well, kind of despite this grim picture, I think at the end of the day, that is just those profound sense of resiliency that people have in working with people, and the inner strength that a lot of people have to overcome. It takes a lot in terms of if we're talking about, drug addiction or drug abuse. But hopefully the message is getting out that help is out there, that help or, isn't necessarily a pill that you take every day. Help is finding someone like a, psychologist or a therapist that you can trust, be open to really kind of talk about what's giving you trouble, where you want to go in life, and being able to really do the work. Therapy is work. Therapy is not as simple as, taking a pill. And I think kind of in our fast-paced society where we very much want, we want the answer, we want it now, we want it quick, and we want it, kind of immediate. And therapy isn't like that, unfortunately. It takes time. It is hard work. Chances are your symptoms are going to maybe feel a little bit worse in the beginning because you're kind of bringing it to the surface. But after that, we're talking about in the long term of it being so much better.
Oh, for sure.
And that's how I like to try to think about it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way, because the long-term result of therapy will put your life in order. And it's interesting. People don't know what they don't know. And if they've got that new normal, that they've been that suffering for so long that they've actually forgotten what it's like to be free of that type of bondage. It's interesting. You had mentioned that help is not a pill. And you talked about going to see a therapist or a psychologist instead of taking the pill. We can't say go see a psychiatrist because psychiatrists can prescribe those pills, correct?
Right. And I'm not necessarily saying that psychiatric medication is not helpful, because in some cases it absolutely is. But in terms of kind of, if we're talking about, feeling very anxious and then just getting a prescription for a benzodiazepine, sure, it kind of helps the physiological response for anxiety. It doesn't really treat kind of the underlying issues.
That's right.
So that's kind of what I mean by that.
So shy of medication, and of course we do want people to go get help or go talk to somebody if they're in a long-term uh, situation, negative situation. What other ways, and we'll close with this, I so appreciate your time tonight. What are ways that people can, like when I grew up, there was this thing called Heloise home remedies or something. You know, you could just get stuff under from your pantry or your sink to, you know, get stains out of the carpet and stuff that you could do at home to fix the problem. Do you have a short list of things that people can do to break the cycle of self-sabotage and try to get their heads back to where they should be? Is it as easy as cleaning out your car if it's a mess, or you know, cleaning out the garage if you're a hoarder?
Well, what I like to try to do when I open up kind of the first sessions of asking, like, how do you want to live your life? What's important to you? How different is your life now? What brings you kind of value, importance? What kind of drives you as a human being? Where do you think you're at now?
Okay.
Or I ask kind of the miracle question. You know, if I could wave a magic wand and your life would be perfect, how would it look?
Yeah. What do you charge for that, by the way?
I don't have a magic wand. I wish I did.
No.
But I kind of, you know, ask more or less of kind of thinking about that. Journaling is a really great way of being able to kind of write down your thoughts, that I you know, encourage people to do a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Taking time for themselves. What makes you, like, are you eating enough? Are you getting 6 to 8 hours of sleep? Are you engaging in exercise, you know, 30 minutes, 3 times a week? Are you getting, you know, appropriate medical care? Are you going to the doctor if you're sick? Do you have any outstanding medical conditions? Because that can greatly influence our psychological wellness as well. And then are you also doing things that you enjoy, that are fun? Because that brings such joy to our life, leisure, that I think a lot of people kind of get caught up in the day-to-day things that we have to do, and aren't doing things that, you know, we kind of like to do. So to be able to treat ourselves with kindness, you know, are you being kind to yourself?
Yeah, I like it. And you know, we're hearing the basics, right? Are you eating nutritious foods? Are you getting exercise on a regular basis? And of course, that's always open to interpretation.
Right.
The definition of exercise.
Right.
Are you sleeping? Because a lot of people practicing pitiful sleep hygiene, where they're actually in bed and they think they're sleeping, but it's not a very restful sleep based on some things that are going on in the bedroom. And you mentioned journaling, which I took special interest in, because journaling takes us back to that. It's almost like a forced introspection. Because journaling, almost like, I always tell people that, because I teach presentation skills, that if you get up and wing it, who knows what's going to happen? But if you actually prepare your speech in advance and you're moving things around on the page and you're working a little bit more on your transitions, you improve your speech by 50% just through the process of writing. And I think that probably helps a lot when people are trying to get their head in order as well.
Right. Yeah.
Especially if they look for patterns in their journal.
Absolutely.
So these are great ideas from a professional, everybody. I hope you've been taking notes. And one more question, Kristen. We mentioned the basics. I think human touch is really important. And I sometimes wonder if we're treating each other enough love. And I'm not just talking about sexual kinds of love. I'm just talking about physical touch from another person. I've met a couple people just in the last few weeks who confessed to me, and I don't know how it came up, that they had never been to get a massage. And I said, well, maybe that's okay because you had kids and you're married, you got a wife who probably rub your back once in a while. And I just watched to see his expression, and it's just like blank, like, no, that never happened either, you know. Oh, gosh. And that's important, isn't it? This feeling of talk about the ultimate human connection. It's actually touching another human being if you've got that kind of a relationship in your life. But even if you don't, you can go get a massage once in a while, yeah? So I feel like we're in that commercial E.F. Hutton where where the guy stops talking and everybody in the room turns to see what happened because our connection has died. There you are, Kristen. We're waiting.
Yes.
Okay, you're back. I'm sorry,
Yes.
we missed your answer to the value of massage and touch. Would you put that on the list of things people could do to kind of reconnect with the people that they live with and that sort of thing?
Oh yes, yeah, I feel, like hugging is huge. It makes us feel, it's all encompassing. It makes us feel safe. And it's a very great way of comforting people. Holding hands. Yeah, human touch is absolutely so incredibly important. It makes us feel safe and loved and appreciated. Not just like you mentioned, kind of in a sexual way or romantic way, but we hug our friends, we shake hands with people that we meet. It's a way to connect.
That's right. That's right. Very good. Kristen, tell everybody where they can find out more about your practice and maybe either hire you as a speaker or maybe book a session with you.
So I have a website. It's www.drkristenhurrell.phd.com. And I can also be reached at my business line at 248-955-5699.
And let's spell out the website for people. It's Dr. Dr. of course, Kristen, Kristen, Hurrell, Hurrell, and then PhD is spelled PhD, everyone. Kristen, you've been delightful. I hope we get a chance to work together sometime in the community. I sense that's in our future. And thank you so much for being with me on the podcast.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
See you later.
Okay. Bye-bye.